The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón, President of the Government of Spain. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón, President of the Government of Spain. I invite him to address the General Assembly. President of the Assembly, Secretary General of the United Nations, heads of state, prime ministers, ministers, delegates. It is my honor to address you as President of the Government of Spain. I do so with the emotion that this hall inspires in me, and with respect for the values that shaped this organization which guide its day-to-day work. I would like to begin by highlighting that this is the first time in history that a Latin American woman is presiding over this assembly. This is yet another reflection of the fact that in the 21st century, global governance is inconceivable without the leadership of women. I define myself as a feminist politician, and now is doubtlessly the time for women. I have always firmly believed that multilateralism allows us to reach levels that would be unattainable through the individual actions of states. With this idea in mind, I would like to reassert the value of agreement and dialogue as means of addressing the challenges faced by the international community, challenges that Spain, my country, is meeting in a hopeful spirit of collective action in the face of those who would spread fear and uncertainty. Spain's commitment to the United Nations is based on shared values and a shared conviction, the pursuit of justice in all its forms, through the respect for human dignity, democracy, freedom, equality, and human rights, embracing, now more than ever, the goals of promoting the peace and well-being of all peoples. The United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, like the European project, in which I so firmly believe, as does my government, was not born from an idealist utopia, as some disparagingly suggest. It was born from a victory over the forces of hatred, racism, and tyranny. Today, the world is facing enormous global challenges. We have spoken about a number of them here, and we have been called upon to act by the people of each of our countries. We are being asked to produce a real agenda for change. These times do not need nationalist or non-inclusive rhetoric. Now is the time, as the Secretary General was saying in his statement, to forge a new cooperative leadership based on willingness, not only on a willingness to listen to others, which of course is important, but also on a readiness to understand their motivations. It is the time to accept with heartfelt empathy that no single person has a monopoly on the truth. We need leadership that can build consensus and forge agreements, that can find solutions and make the most of synergies. We cannot simply dismiss everything we have accomplished by working together, which is significant. Today, the world is better than it was, and much better than it would have been had the United Nations never existed. However, the real strength of this organization, I believe, does not lie in its past achievements, which have been many, but rather in everything it can do to shape the future. The time is now, ladies and gentlemen. We are the last generation, as we have often heard, that will have the chance to halt the consequences of climate change, and we are the first generation to have the wherewithal to eradicate poverty from the world. It is not a question of seeing obstacles, but of identifying opportunities. It is a question of making change into a catalyst for achieving sustainable development. And this is not an ideal, it is a real necessity, as has been shared by many speakers before me. Many countries are now facing the dilemma between continuing to be open societies or transforming themselves into closed, inward-looking societies. As if a return to the false calm of borders and renouncing collective action were the only means of addressing the uncertainties of our times. We already know where such ideas lead. Therefore, now we must look beyond the seeming dictates of these fast-moving times. Let us move past the lost decade of the economic crisis and growing inequality which our societies suffer from. Our commitment has a name, a date, and goals. It is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which the government of Spain is fully committed to. It was Kofi Annan, to whom I wish to pay tribute to with my words today, who taught us many things. One of them is something I should like to share with you today. He taught us that human rights, development, and security, and economic and social development are all interdependent. I would like to call to mind these pillars, accompanied by an additional thought. We must put the dignity of human beings at the heart of all our public and political action. The principles that have brought us to this point in our history are not in retreat and never will be. In fact, they are more relevant than ever. And that is where Spain will continue to stand, defending those values, because without dignity, without equality between men and women, without respect for human rights, there will be no peace and no development in the world. As a member state of the United Nations Human Rights Council until 2020, Spain supports initiatives that strengthen the capacity of the Council and of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We are fortunate enough to have in the High Commissioner now a person of the political and personal statute of the Chilean Michelle Bachelet. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is celebrating its 70th anniversary, provides the framework to move forward. Madam President, there is no greater injustice than that which defines what a human being will or will not be, based on whether they are born a boy or a girl. How to measure everything that generations of our societies have lost by accepting this discrimination between men and women for generations. Humankind must not tolerate this injustice. We must develop a truly global roadmap to eradicate all forms of discrimination which are still, today in the 21st century societies, in 2018, being suffered by women because they are women. This may be gender-based violence, trafficking of women, or female genital mutilation. In this endeavour, the United Nations can rely on Spain's commitment. The Cabinet of Ministers I lead, ladies and gentlemen, is made up of 60% women because we aim to lead by example. Because the battleground in our society is in companies, education, and society itself. And much of this battleground is linked to gender equality. In leadership, where glass ceilings remain simply due to inertia. I would like, therefore, to congratulate publicly the Secretary-General on having reached full parity between men and women in his senior management group for the first time in the history of the United Nations. Spain, ladies and gentlemen, will continue to promote the Women, Peace and Security agenda. It is crucial that women participate as peace brokers in all phases of conflict, in our opinion, for them to be resolved. We will continue to support the unquestionable work of UN Women, to whom we contribute very actively. Spain was the first donor to establish a partnership framework with this organisation. I have also joined with this government the Circle of Leadership promoted by the Secretary-General to combat sexual exploitation and abuse in UN operations. It is essential that we promote a zero-tolerance culture. Zero tolerance in this area. Madam President, there are no shortcuts or quick fixes for today's major challenges, such as crises which affect us very directly in countries like Spain, the refugee and migration crises. Humanity cannot simply accept as inexorable the fact that 68 million people have been forcibly displaced around the world, of whom more than 25 million are refugees and over 3 million are asylum seekers. During this session, the General Assembly will adopt something very important for this government, the Global Compact on Refugees. We deem this to be a great leap forward, which we must applaud. We must work closely with the High Commissioner for Refugees and acknowledge the situation that this turmoil causes in host countries above all. We know that 85% of the world's refugees and asylum seekers are concentrated in developing countries. These states need our empathy and commitment, and, above all else, justice and an equitable distribution of this responsibility, where we all have the obligation to help. And Spain will do that. Madam President, Spain has suffered the calamities of the economic crisis more than almost any other Western European country. Nonetheless, I should like to share with all of you that the vast majority of Spanish society has never turned its back on the tragedy resulting from migration. And of this I am proud, and I would like to underscore it. I am proud of our society, which has not let itself be radicalized by the fever of xenophobic discourse based on a culture of fear of the other. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, this is because we remember our own history as a country. We were a country of migrants and refugees, and that is why we'll not abandon our international commitments. If we take in a boat that is adrift in the Mediterranean with 630 people on board, it is not only because international law demands it, but also because it is a moral imperative which Spain will respond to. Spain welcomes the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which is set to be adopted in a brotherly country with whom we share so much, Morocco, in Marrakesh in December. When migration, ladies and gentlemen, is safe, orderly and regular, we can benefit from its positive aspects. Rather than an image of countries as fortresses with exclusionary and xenophobic narratives, the government of Spain and our country champions the concepts of solidarity, humanity and respect. Spain is well aware of what this challenge entails. We are ultimately a country of origin, transit, destination and return. We defend a migration policy whose fundamental goal is to address the root causes of migration, such as poverty, environmental degradation, or a lack of opportunities for many young people in the world. Ultimately, we must aspire for migration to be a free choice and not a necessity. This policy, I believe, and the government of Spain believes, requires dialogue and cooperation with the countries of origin and transit, and particularly with Africa. And we are working in the European Union and in the government of Spain significantly on this. Madam President, there are many forms of poverty. Please allow me to underscore the immorality, as we see it, of childhood poverty and poverty that afflicts women. More than 15 million girls, and I wish to repeat that figure, 15 million girls of school age will never have the chance to learn to read or write in primary school. 15 million girls. And 330 million women are living on less than $2 a day. To combat this and other forms of poverty, I would like to mention the reason for a global perspective, and I think it's important to share this with you. The reason for a new 21st century humanism, which is based on the values that have brought the greatest prosperity ever known to humankind throughout our history. The 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals are, we believe, the current embodiment of that spirit, with humankind and the planet at its heart. We must adopt this as a new global social contract. This is what Agenda 2030 is, and the Sustainable Development Goals, a new global social contract which binds all of us and connects us with future generations. Spain is going to work with determination to make this change. We have approved an action plan for implementing Agenda 2030, and we will launch our own national sustainable development strategy. Indeed, many of the measures adopted by my new government in these 100 days are directly or indirectly tied to our commitment to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030. Combating gender violence, measures against child poverty, which we have implemented in our government, and measures against energy poverty, to promote universal health care in our country, policies for grants and scholarships to advance equal opportunities for the youth in our country, and improving workers' rights. This is a summary of actions which are fully in line with Agenda 2030 Agenda. Spain is moving forward along the path traced by the United Nations in Agenda 2030. Spain has done this in the past, when we championed the Millennium Development Goals. with the largest contribution from any single donor in the United Nations system, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. Furthermore, many years ago, Spain also created the Cooperation Fund for Water and Sanitation in Latin America and the Caribbean, in which we've invested more than 800 million euros. But none of this makes any sense unless we tackle the greatest threat of our generation, the impact of climate change. I come from a country, Spain, where 40% of our surface area is threatened by desertification. Therefore, we must fight this battle at every level, which means addressing its most immediate effects, but also and above all, it means addressing underlying structural causes which exacerbate the climate change we are seeing. This is why we are keenly aware of the need to undertake a steady decarbonisation and a controlled decarbonisation of our economy. Yesterday, I announced that Spain would join the Towards Carbon Neutrality coalition. With this step, we deepen our commitment to implementing ambitious medium and long-term strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and carbon dioxide, which will enable us to fully comply with the Paris Agreement. Because the fact is, we cannot delay any further in making a just ecological transition to lay the foundations for a new production model which the Spanish government is committed to. Our future depends on renewable energies and clean technologies, ladies and gentlemen, and only from this starting point will we be able to combine material well-being with social justice and environmental sustainability. I would also like to share with you that we will participate actively and constructively in COP24 in Poland this year, and of course also in the Climate Change Summit that the Secretary General will convene next year, and which we hope will be a success. Spain will contribute constructively and actively to this. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, we have to be able to move forward and comply with the Paris Agreement, and these meetings, we believe, offer us the opportunity to move forward and achieve our goals. Madam President, it is also up to us to make progress on the security agenda, but a security focused on human beings. It has taken us a long time, I believe, and I'd like to share this with all of you. It has taken us a long time to learn that security is much more than a concept tied to defence in the military sense of the term. Security finds its raison d'être not in the absence of conflict, but rather in guaranteeing human beings' ability to be free. Terrorism continues to be one of the major threats to this freedom, which I call for. This phenomenon was not born out of a supposed clash of civilizations, as some have claimed a few decades ago. There are few areas in which cooperation, multilateralism as represented here in the United Nations, and collaborative leadership can bear such abundant fruit, as the Secretary General was saying in his statement, can bear such abundant and beneficial fruits. The fight against terrorist financing networks is crucial, as are international police and judiciary cooperation at international level and the exchange of information and intelligence. These are fundamental, and I am sure that all of you here would share that. However, it is also essential to combat the hatred and violence that are being echoed in so many fora. We must do all that we can to prevent our young people from falling prey to fanaticism and to radical exclusionary discourse. Governments, businesses, and civil society must build social and economic integration, which can prevent recruitment networks from taking over this space. It is here, in this space, devoid of any personal expectations, that we must win the battle against terrorism. Likewise, we must be able to overcome the slightest hint of division and resentment, also crafting a narrative of solidarity and remembrance that includes the voices of the victims of terrorism and strengthens the cohesion of our societies. Investing in education, ultimately then, ladies and gentlemen, in education, in our young people, in taking an integratory approach to migration issues and providing the media with tools to combat hate speech, which run throughout global discussions on this, and to fight stereotypes. These are essential areas and are precisely the areas of action that fall under the remit of the Alliance of Civilizations, which is an instrument for dialogue between cultures and religions, and the government of Spain defends that. The growing tensions regarding nuclear proliferation and weapons of mass destruction are equally troubling. The world cannot afford another arms race. We must therefore make the effort to regain lost consensus and to strengthen the non-proliferation regime. And you can count upon the commitment and participation of the government of Spain in this. The spread of armed conflicts and their changing nature, which is increasingly hybrid and complex, also demand our attention. Spain is firmly committed to strengthening the role of the United Nations in maintaining peace and international security. We therefore support something the Secretary General said with regard to the measures promoted by this institution to position prevention and peace building at the centre of the UN's work. We also support the Secretary General's efforts to reform the architecture and management of United Nations peacekeeping operations, to which Spain has been a very active contributor for decades. To give you an idea, over the years, more than 160,000 Spanish troops have served with, I believe, loyalty and commitment, and the support and empathy of much of our people beyond our borders to United Nations peacekeeping operations. Consequently, Spain has supported the Secretary General's Action for Peacekeeping Declaration regarding peacekeeping operations. But prevention, maintaining and consolidating peace are not enough. Wherever a conflict breaks out, we must act. Spain therefore supports respect for and enforcement of international humanitarian law, so that no violation enjoys impunity. I call upon the justice system, therefore, to pursue and to prosecute those who commit war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. Here, the efforts of the International Criminal Court are, we believe, irreplaceable. That must be stated loud and clear. I also call upon the leaders of states and of the international community to protect their civilian populations. And again, it's important to underscore this here in this assembly. Spain robustly supports the France-Mexico initiative to limit the use of veto powers in cases of mass atrocity. Humanitarian disasters like those in Syria and Iraq remind us of the high price to pay of failing to arrive promptly. Madam President, for the multilateral system to be effective, we must renovate and reinforce it, and this is a continued debate within this Assembly. Because if we do this, we will be defending everything that we believe in, which is multilateralism. Spain therefore strongly supports the reform of the United Nations system promoted by the Secretary General. We have before us the challenge of clearly integrating the pillars of peace, sustainable development and human rights, and of avoiding the duplications and overlaps which are dragging down this institution. We must win back, and again I want to underscore this here, we must win back public opinion. I think this is vital. We must win the favour of a global citizenry that has grown up and come of age in an atmosphere of growing scepticism about an organisation that can no longer rest on its past achievements, which were significant and many, and which we must remember, but we must now tackle with ambition the task of winning over new generations. Our sole source of strength lies in the capacity of the United Nations to project this message to the world. Therefore, I think it is very important and fundamental that we lead by example. To be worthy of this example, and by those who represent the very best of the UN, those workers who risk their lives in conflict zones, to all of those men and women who put their lives at risk in conflict zones every day, I express my sincerest recognition. The challenge of the dispute into which politics has fallen is also at stake in the multilateral arena. We must win this battle against those who would spread the shadow of uncertainty with a single goal, that of casting doubt on the role of international organisations such as the United Nations. Spain is a solid ally in this task. Madam President, there are two issues that within the context of the United Nations I should also like to call your attention to before ending my intervention. The first is Gibraltar. As regards Gibraltar, Spain's position is well known and aligned with United Nations doctrine. And it is well known by the United Nations General Assembly. The United Nations decision to leave the European Union means that Gibraltar will also leave the Union. As the government of Spain, I would like for us to take advantage of this historic opportunity to establish a new relationship with the UK and involving Spain to bring prosperity to the whole region, to the Gibraltarians and, of course, those to the wider area of the Campo de Gibraltar. Another area which is of concern to us is, of course, the Western Sahara. As you know, Spain defends the central role of the United Nations and would like to contribute to the efforts of the Secretary General and his personal envoy to achieving a just, lasting and mutually acceptable political solution that will provide for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara in the context of arrangements consistent with the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations. Madam President, Spain is a fully fledged democracy. This year we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of our constitution, which brought democracy to our country. It's a fully fledged democracy, which ranks high on all of the global indexes that measure the democratic quality of countries' institutions. Spain, indeed, has made defence of and commitment to multilateralism a hallmark of our foreign policy, a hallmark which we maintain with fervour and conviction when we leave our country, when we go abroad. Today, the world faces major threats, as a number of speakers have said today. Cooperative leadership, of which Spain is a part, demands a renewed commitment to multilateralism. Solutions for global problems can only be found through cooperation between states, and this is the firm conviction of the government of Spain and the Spanish society. We believe that the decade to come will represent a victory for consensus and a defeat of those who only seek to hear the echoes of their own voices. I address you today in a city which saw the arrival of millions of human beings fleeing from poverty and from political, racial and religious persecution. The immense majority of them who came to this country, this city, were Europeans. Today, on both shores of the North Atlantic, a collective veil of amnesia is being drawn over the memory of what we were and of what we are. Because what we are is diversity, nothing but diversity. As a great Spanish poet of 20th century exiles wrote, Leon Felipe, and I cite, "It's not a matter of getting there first on your own, but of arriving in time with everyone." Nothing defines better than the United Nations the vitality of Agenda 2030. It represents this decade's horizon of hope, one that must be conquered in order to arrive, as the poet said, together and in time, with leaving no one behind. May it be that way. I thank you.
En nombre de la Asamblea General.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón, President of the Government of Spain, for the statement just made. And I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear a statement by Her Excellency Ana Brnabić, Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia.